In this video piece, I'm going to be going through what has been the best year of my angling career, going through some of the catches that I've had during it, and more importantly, the adaptations that I've made on each different water in order to try and keep the bites coming. We're actually here on Dinton Black Swan today. I'm not actually a member of this lake, I'm a member of White Swan next door, but I'm here as a guest with a friend of mine for a 3-night session, see if I can nick one out. It's the middle of December. I'm on my second night, I've done 2 moves so far, and I found a few yesterday, so all being well, I can hopefully pick up a last minute fish, although the lake is fishing really difficult. And the last one out was about 3 weeks ago, so it's up against me, but I'm hoping for a result after seeing a few fish yesterday. My fishing in 2020 started with 4 trips up to Farlows in the months of January and February. I was very successful, landing 23 carp in total, with 6 of them being 30s. I had my 2 biggest hits from a swim, which was on the wind when we had big, huge wind fronts, when we had the named storms. And the windier and rainier, the better, the more the bites are coming. Most of the lads on there were fishing the main open water bowls, so quite often I was having that area of the lake to myself, and I don't think people had realised they were getting down there in numbers. I actually had one evening where I had 9 takes in 8 hours. Just been a little bit different to fishing maggots, corn and crumb, nothing revolutionary, a good standard winter mix. And then the bites just kept on coming for me. After my trips to Farlows, I was keen to get a trip into Lynch Hill, to Chistchurch Linch Hill complex, as I knew it was going to go Syndicate as of from April, so I wanted to get a session in beforehand. I knew it had done a few fish on zigs and hadn't done any fish on the bottom, so I went with the intention of fishing zigs, and I had one the first evening, about 7 p.m. the first evening, a lovely 24-pound common, and obviously I thought I was doing the correct thing. But a friend of mine had a fish on casters that night, which pricked my ears up a little bit. And then the following night, I stuck to my gun, stuck to zigs, and I had nothing, and he had 2 fish. Well, I had 2 more nights of the session left, and I had casters on me as well. So I decided to go in with the casters and the crumb and everything else, the mix that I'd put in together. By making this change, I actually ended up having a brace of fish the following morning, which was 86 pounds 10 ounces, my best ever brace, which included Scar, which is the lake's biggest resident, at 49 pound. Just by being adaptive to making the changes at that time, caught me those fish. So it really is, even though I'd caught on zigs, just keeping an eye on what's going on around the lake can get you extra bites. After my trip to Lynch Hill, it was time to start concentrating on my Syndicate water for the season, which was Dinton White Swan. I would have started back up on there earlier, but we'd had the river flood into it in mid-February, which had coloured it up, so knowing that I was going to be starting on zigs, I didn't really want to be fishing the coloured water. I managed to get two night sessions in before the lockdown on the zigs, and I did manage to nick a fish on the last night just before it shut down, a nice low 20 common. And then unfortunately we went into the lockdown period we all experienced. Like everyone else, I was chomping at the bit to get out as soon as we were allowed out of lockdown, and I'd booked myself onto the Blue Lagoon for a trip to try and catch the mirror that I was after last year. They were only doing 48-hour sessions at the time, so I booked myself straight on for the 48-hour session. with my intention, knowing that the lake was busy, was to fish long, because the previous season, every time it had been busy, the fish had seemed to have pushed out to the middle. I went with a mix of casters again, just to sort of give a small bit of bait there, but nothing too much, and just something to help them drop onto it. And I actually had the fish while I was still spomming the casters that evening, on my first evening, the one that I was after. And having already had the second biggest in that lake, that put the end to that campaign, and I moved on to Dinton White Swan after that. 3 days after having the big one, I was back down onto Dinton. They too had brought in a 48-hour rule, and I did my 48 hours to no joy. The lake was very busy, as you can imagine, and there were lots of people putting bait in. I did another 48-hour session the following week, and witnessed the same. No fish coming out, but lots and lots of bait going in still. And I hatched a plan in my head that I was going to probably fish zigs the following session because of nobody catching and so much bait going in. And I turned back up at 4 AM the following week for my 48-hour session, and I found some fish straight away. So I ran back to the car and got my kit and put out a couple of zigs. And I didn't even get a chance to get the bivvy set up before it was away with a nice 25-pound linear. And by midday I'd had a further 2 bites, which then saw most of the lake turning onto zigs and putting zigs on, which did about 15 fish over the next few days to a few anglers around the lake. So that was clearly the tactic to be on. A few days later, due to a few losses with people fishing zigs in weedy areas, the owner quite rightly decided to ban the zigs, which he always does during the weedy periods in the summer. So it was back to square one again. But with having seen all the amount of bait going in, I was keen to put a little bit of bait out for attraction, but I didn't want to have too much food value, so I thought I'd go for a bit more of a winter tactic of fishing crumb and pellet and just a few broken boilies in the mix. And straight away, first session, I managed to have a fish, so I was pretty sure I was onto the right track. And then the next month I had a really good period on Dinton. I actually caught for 6 sessions in a row, which is pretty unheard of on White Swan, certainly the best period I'd had. And this culminated in the captures of the Son of Triple Row and John's Linear. Having caught my main target, the Son of Triple Row, it was time to start looking at my second target, which was a fish called the greyfish. Well, having known that 90% of its catches had come from a small summer bay, which is about 6 acres, whereas the rest of the lake's about 18 acres, I started concentrating all my efforts onto that area. The fish were now starting to get caught on bait, so and now being mid-July, I started baiting the swim up quite regularly every time I was trying to fish in the same swim or the same area and keep the bait going in. And it was mainly boilie mix. I probably put in over the course of 3 months about 150 kilos of boilies, so I really was giving it them. And I had 7 fish in this period right up to around about the end of September. The best of that being a fish called two-tone at 40£6, and another fish that I really wanted, a 3D fish, spawned out at £31, but a really nice scaly fish. Like I say, mid-September the bites did start to dry up in that area, and I think it was mainly due to an algae bloom that the lake had suffered, and that bay in particular wasn't getting a lot of wind on it, so it was thicker algae in that area, and I think it killed off the weed, which is what I think made most of the fish disappear. But I stuck to my guns because the one fish that I was after, the greyfish, I was still seeing about from time to time, and I thought with less fish about, it would, make more chance of me catching that one particular fish I was after. So I went for a bit of a blank spell for about 6 weeks. Even though my friends were catching at the other end of the lake, I was determined to stick to my guns and try and catch the one fish that I was after, but unfortunately I was unsuccessful in that. The end of October saw the end of my campaign on Dinton. Unfortunately, I only had one more fish in that period, which was a small 20 common. The bites really had dried up for me, like I say, and I moved on to my winter water, which was Tyram Hall, where you filmed me before. I had a set, my very first session, I had a bite within 2 hours, but unfortunately got behind a set of pads and managed to ping the hook on me. Since then, I've been struggling, but the whole lake has hardly done any bites whatsoever. I've been adapting my techniques and tactics constantly, but unfortunately up to now I haven't had anything. But I can take confidence in the fact I kept trying zigs on there, and although not many people have really fished them at all in the last couple of years on that lake, a couple of the lads have followed suit and they have had bites. Unfortunately, all the bites came in a 3-day period when I wasn't on the lake. It did 6 bites on the zigs. Fortunately, I wasn't there, and I got back down to the lake, and it seemed to have shut up shop again, which is unfortunate. But unfortunately, that is carp fishing. We all need a bit of luck with it as well. The end of November, just before my birthday, I thought I'd have a little trip with a friend down to Farlows. Although he'd been fishing extremely well, as soon as we got there, a couple of days before, it hadn't done any fish, really had shut up shop. I saw a lot of fish show my first night, mostly just past where I could get to in my water. But I was fishing the same mix, the maggots, crumb and corn mix that I had the year before. But I didn't have anything the first night, and I had a tin of tiger nuts in the car. And knowing how deadly they can be, I decided to fish that on one of the spots that I was fishing in the 2 areas. And that night I managed to nick a 28-pound mirror on the tiger nut rod, which is brilliant. I only had the 2 nights, which was a shame because I'd like to have done a third, having maybe with all 3 of the rods on tiger nuts, and it might well have brought me a few extra fish. But I was still happy with the result because the lake had about 30 anglers on, and I think there was only 2 fish out while I was there. So I'd had one of them, so it was a good result really. Since the trip to Farlows, I've done a couple more trips up to Tyram, which is when, in between them 2 trips, is when those fish came out on zigs. No joy for me as yet, but I shall keep persevering. I'm not one to be put off by blanking. All through the year, I've been constantly changing my tactics, my techniques, and how I've gone about it, and in order to try and keep the bites coming. And it's something I like to try and do as I go from venue to venue, and we go from different periods of the year, and the way that the fish will respond to bait or not respond to it, as it may well be. If you haven't already done so, check out the Prologic YouTube channel and subscribe to it. There's a couple of videos I've already done on there, and you'll also find this video in the new year on there. I've got a few more hours left for the cameras with me today, so hopefully we'll have a bit of a result to show you ready for next time. If not, I shall catch you up in the new year, and tight lines to everyone.